Go.
Well, welcome to another episode of the XGE podcast, where former GE leaders from the Jack Welch era talk about business and leadership and management best practices from a GE perspective. With myself, Tom Wolf, Joel Kennedy, and our guest, Larry Chiavaro. I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who knows Larry much better than I do, to do the intros. Go ahead, Joel.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for listening. So the common feature that we all have is we're all former GE alum. I worked with Tom at GE Information Services, and he has some experience with other GE businesses. We worked in IT. Larry, it's a pleasure to have you on because you are an executive, a specialist in sales. You can talk to a lot of how GE, top line revenue, profitability, the whole nine, even Six Sigma weaved its way through the sales process. But Larry, I think there's probably a very small population of people who don't know who you are, especially in consumer lending. But can you tell folks a little bit about your background with General Electric and who you are and where you are today, even?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Joel, and thanks, Tom. Well, thank you for inviting me today. It's very exciting to be sharing some of my experiences here. So I spent almost 10 years with GE Capital back in the 90s and started in the auto finance division of GE out of Barrington, Illinois. And my role at the time was I was a district sales manager, area sales manager, they called us, which really meant I was a sales guy. I was calling on auto dealers for the auto finance business and doing indirect lending for subprime credit. It was a new entry for GE on the auto finance side, and I would call on dealers in the New York City marketplace. A wonderful, wonderful time I had at GE, and miss those days when you had your little GE meatball on your business card and you walked into a dealer. It meant something. You were with GE. You were selected to represent the best of the best, and it was always very exciting to me. I continued out of GE Auto for another 16 months into GE Fleet, where and I'll share with you as we get there how I got to that point. But I was heading up a new venture for GE Fleet, which was a new track lease product with a zero residual, which was for light and medium duty truck dealers. And I ran production and built the sales organization for half the US until GE decided to get out of most of the auto lending and truck lending businesses.
Cool. You said you missed the days. It was a good experience. And part of what Joel and I talk about on this podcast is, and not to, look, we can all blow smoke up each other's, what's with, how great things were. But no, there really was kind of a magic about the talent and the culture. And Joel and I talked about that in depth already. What's particular about being in a sales team, part of the sales process and the rigor there, do you think was kind of unique about GE that made it such a positive thing?
So in GE Auto Finance, we had 900 field reps or area sales managers. And I quickly climbed to be the top area sales manager at GE for 4 years in a row out of 900. And so to me, that was an important career piece for me. And the top 10, we are all really good friends today. And so there was the top 10 of us, then the next bunch of B players, and then the middle of the road guys, and then, the C and the D players, which, based on the GE training, we were basically taught that, hey, the A players drive this business and you guys need to, maintain that relationship and move forward. And we did that. Today, some of my closest friends were A players. I joke, back in the day, Mike Niebling was number one when I started, and I told him I was going to take his number one slot. But the only way that I can move Mike out, because he's one of the best I've seen in my career, was that Mike left the company before I did. And so with Mike out, I took over his slot. So we still joke about this 20-something years later.
Shout out to Mike Niebling. Hope he's doing well.
So was it caliber of talent, Larry, or was it process? Was it, culture? Was it a combination? What do you think made that team so sharp?
I think it was more culture than process. I think the talent level, again, 50% of the group was a high level. But I think the culture was good. We we had a VP of sales that we reported to. That's one of my close friends today and my mentor, George Klinke. George was a GE veteran for many years, and he moved over from GE Auto Leasing to the GE subprime program. And George was just wonderful with people, and he understood that he had built a team of high performers, and he would just get out of the way and ask us for whatever help or interference that he could run for us. So George knew how to manage high performers at that particular point. And so the culture there was great. Um, Being a background of networking for me for many years, I was able to get involved in some of the GE, um, I would say, outside clubs. And one was boundaryless sales. And for those who don't know what boundaryless sales is that boundaryless sales contributed $8 million a year in revenue to the bottom line, excuse me, $8 million to the bottom line every year at GE. And we had one representative from every GE business,
Mm.
and we would meet monthly in New York City. We had an executive council of 22 of us. And on a quarterly basis, we would meet what they would call an all sales day. So all of the GE businesses would send their sales folks to an all sales day to network with other GE businesses. And we would do that typically in a large hotel. And being on the executive committee out of New York and GE headquarters was so close, I had the benefit of meeting Dennis Naden back in the day. And Dennis,
Mm.
who was the CFO, became our executive sponsor. So listening to Dennis over the years on GE and the culture and so forth was quite encouraging to people back in the day. And he shared a lot of those inner workings with us. And you're talking about just sales guys. Additionally, GE has probably the best training out there. But as a sales guy, we used to fight it. I mean, I would constantly fight training. I don't want to go to training. You're taking me out of the field. What are we
Yeah.
doing with this? Whether it was, additional training that most companies don't go through, antitrust training. We had to get certified every year. And then I was on the initial group that was selected for the Six Sigma program. So before all the belts came out, they selected a group of us, and we were the first green belts at GE back in the day. And then I eventually became a GE black belt. And some of the process management worked. Other things we would shake our heads because, as a finance company, it didn't work. But
Yeah.
I'm thankful today that I did go through that, 20 something years ago.
So, okay, let me parse a few of these things. I'm sure Joel has questions, but that was
Yeah.
okay. So, first of all, the first, that got out of the way, the boss that got out of the way, and let you guys do what you do, especially when he knew he had that top caliber talent. So to me, that goes back to something Joel and I did talk about in our initial episode about the Welch leadership values and that speed, simplicity, self-confidence thing. And he wanted leaders that had self-confidence. So to me, I think it takes sales guys. I'm more of an IT guy. So while you were out front, so the boundaryless sales thing, frankly, to me, I didn't know much about until you just told me now. Joel and I were the guys busy on the back end with IT stuff or sourcing stuff. And, we considered ourselves critical support to the operational sides of the business, whether it's manufacturing or financial services, the operational systems, or to the frontline sales folks, but we were more back office. But the interesting thing about all that is that the sales guys are known, in the world, for good or for worse, for better or for worse, as having egos, right? And having a certain personality type. But I think it takes a heck of a lack of bad ego, or like a healthy ego, to get out of the way and let people thrive. You know what I mean? And the same thing with the boundaryless sales group. Getting sales guys to cooperate outside of their territory or outside of their commission structure in a lot of companies, or even within GE sometimes, is a challenge, right? Because the negative reputation of sales folks is all they give a crap about is their commission. And, they'll navigate that commission structure to make their checkbook look good. And if you ask them to put on a bigger hat, like a bigger corporate hat or whatever, it can be a challenge. So I think it's a real testament to the culture of GE and the strong leadership, that they were willing to, one, get out of the way and act in a boundaryless way.
Right. Well, Dennis Naden, with the cooperation of marketing, put together a program, a national program, that if you brought in a, you'd fill out a form. If you brought in another GE business into one of your customers, there was a reward. There was a point reward, and the points equaled for prizes, and then a certain amount of points equaled a trip. And so I was selected and won a trip to Bermuda with all of the other boundaryless sales folks from who won around the country, and it was wonderful back in the day with our spouses. And one of the interesting pieces is that the GE executives were there, and they were very active with us on this trip, including a presentation to you and your spouse in a setting about GE and the benefits and such. And so it was a great reward back in the day. But we would bring in other GE businesses into our customers.
So there were there were incentives. It wasn't just, hey, the culture's great, put on
Yeah.
your big hat.
There was incentives later on, not in the beginning.
Okay.
Was
Did
that
you
Mark Makers, Larry? Is that what that was called?
No, I'm not familiar with that. This was called boundaryless sales, and the quarterly events that we would do were called all sales days.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah, I like those concepts for other multinational type groups. And then wasn't the group within GE Capital, wasn't there a Pinnacle sales thing as well?
There was a Pinnacle group, and I won the Pinnacle Award quite a few times as well.
And that was how you, so again, that was Welch's philosophy though, is you reward success, right? You publicly reward it. You ask people to stretch, you push them, you push for that talent. But they were good at rewarding, in those kinds of ways. And he wasn't as big on punishing for not getting to stretch goals, although the force rank of the talent, removing the bottom ones that weren't performing. And Joel and I talked about this before as well. I used to be a little harsher in my mentality of, okay, get rid of the wasted people that aren't strong. They're not, they're worthless. They're not good. That was maybe a egotistical way to look at it, because I got into those A player ranks as well within my function. But it was more, in my opinion, they weren't good fits, right? They might not have been good salespeople, but they also just weren't good fits for the GE thing. And so by, focusing on the top ones and investing in them and rewarding them, then you kept bringing in better talent, I think.
But think of it this way. It wasn't always income generated, because the pay structure at GE was much less than other competitors, right? You could have gone to another competitor, probably got double the base salary and maybe a higher commission payout, but you weren't working for GE.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the difference. Okay. And people would leave, because the grass was greener, they can get more money, but ultimately they wouldn't be as successful.
Larry, that was exactly true in the functions that didn't have base versus variable. I mean, I never had variable comp because I was I had rewards, stock option rewards, stretch goals, MBOs, things like that. But I never had, a commission to go earn. And it was exactly the same in the leadership functions of finance, IT. We all knew, even if you were in that A player circle, it was a joke. It's like, I can make 10% more probably tomorrow just by walking out the door. You know what I mean?
Right.
But you weren't working for GE. Yeah.
That's right. You didn't leave. And it was interesting that one day I remember I was out calling on my customers, and my pager went off. We had pagers back then. I called in. It was my boss's boss, who I didn't talk to too often, but we had a good relationship. And out of the blue, telling me that I was just getting awarded stock options. I mean, that was wonderful, right? I mean, it's just a surprise.
Yeah.
Hey, here you go. We appreciate what you're doing, and here's stock options. Here's how they work, and thank you for being part of the organization.
Yeah, and you were working your butt off, and there were stretch goals, and it was a love-hate thing sometimes with the how brutal the rhythm was and how you had to push. But then you get those stock option rewards, and you were like, hey, this is okay. They are appreciating my efforts here, and there is a payoff. So that's excellent. Yeah, cool.
One of the things I really liked about working at GE was the measure of structure. And there was definitely this kind of military type overlay, I felt, in terms of, we were doing a lot of heavy projects that would conform with DoD, type quality for, so you need a heavy document driven life cycle, and things are going to take time. So when you left, Larry, did you find that some of these tools, whether they were, Six Sigma or CAP tools, or, the rhythm of review that they have with session 1, 2, 3, session I, all these different audits, you knew where you were within the year, and you knew within that current year when you had to start looking to plan for next year. Did you find any of that valuable when you left and then you took other executive roles?
Yeah, I mean, I use a lot of the process management today that I learned at GE. I've used the structure of the ideas on a whiteboard with
Mhm.
sticky notes. I've used um, um, the pipeline management
Yeah.
that we had back in the day as well. I use that today, okay, with updates. Um, I've used the 5, 15, 50, 15, 10 quite a bit. And so for those who don't know, your top 5% of your team typically does most of your business. Then you have the next 15, the middle of the road are your 50 percenters, and then again, 15, 10. And what this was is that every quarter we had to force rank our people. And when you have to force rank your people, it's a very difficult conversation that you have to have first with yourself and then with the employees as you rank them. And working with Jack Welch at the helm, Jack wanted any of the bottom 10 or 15, he wanted them replaced every quarter. He did not want to have an organization and a company of low performers at every different group within GE. And
It's
I
interesting.
think
We,
today,
we did.
today you can use that as well.
Well, we did that across the company in all functions, but it was
Yes.
more relevant in sales. Larry and I were talking beforehand. We're going to try to put an artifact or two up, on the complimentary blog post with this, so people can see some of the visuals of what those things looked like, as reference. But yeah, in sales, my gosh, salespeople have to sell, right? So they got to be delivering. The pipeline management you talked about, and using some of that out, okay. So I've done a lot of IT sales support roles. So, SFA systems and CRM systems, and, talking to large corporations and small businesses about, okay, it's all built in pipeline funnel. Anyone can find that right now, right? You can find it in salesforce.com. You can find it in Microsoft Dynamics CRM. You can find a basic contact management, even in the old school Act that was on computers. And a lot of people do it, and even at GE with our big budget on technology, we often just did it in a damn good spreadsheets, right? Just damn good spreadsheets. So anyone can turn that on right now, right? And get that stuff. But there was, that doesn't mean they understand it and they get it. And that was something that I thought, this is my take, Larry. I would love to hear what you think. When I worked with sales teams at GE, look, we could have the pipeline management software, but at the end of the day, when you had that rigorous rhythm of review of those sales calls and, and the meetings with the VP of sales and his field team, they didn't give a crap if the system was good or not, or if the process was working well or not. At the end of the day, they updated those damn numbers. And if you had to then stay up late and get the spreadsheet to look perfect for that executive, so that you really knew where you were on your pipeline, and you really knew, like, on the revenue generating account management side, okay, were we hitting the numbers that account that was already won? What were they hitting? And what were we doing to work on that? And then you looked more at the new prospects, the hunting versus the farming, and where were we on the percentage of those closing, and where were they on the pipeline? So you can find that out of the box, right? Anywhere. But you have to have managers that really understand that. And I think the financial rigor and the cultural rigor and the discipline, like, we got the crap kicked out of us if we showed up without good numbers. And, a sales guy that said, oh, I didn't get a chance to update my spreadsheet and turn it in to that poor admin that had to work till 8 o'clock at night preparing it for the morning. That sales guy did not survive, right? Because the
That's right.
numbers were. So is my gut right that there was something about the GE rigor combined with that process stuff that made it so good?
It is. I think, for me, my takeaways, and today, yes, you have many CRMs and pipeline management tools, but it always comes down to the same thing: garbage in, garbage out. And so most of these are littered with um, prospects that aren't going to be buying across every different type of industry that's out there. And so, I've taken it one step, one step forward, and I use the GE way with our spreadsheets and updating it monthly so that I can get more, granular view. But
Mhm.
I'm not one to push management of daily call activity and such, because if there's no sales, that means there's no activity. Okay, and if there's no activity in sales today, that will end pretty quick. And so it's a results business, and I'd rather manage, you know, transactions that are likely to result in sales and some early prospects to move along, but not a very large database of prospects that won't close.
See, I think that's where you having those talented senior managers who know sales is critical. Because look, if I go into a small business and I consult with them, or I go into a big business and I'm trying to say, look, you do need to have your discipline. You do need to have your process, blah, 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 blah. I'm not a sales guy. I will never be a VP of sales. That's not me. I got to find an A player, talented person that gets it, because they then make, in my opinion, with any tool, any process, the judgment call, right? When do we rely on, crunching the numbers and the database versus when do we really have to completely just know what's good prospects, results. And there's a balance there of when to use the tools. You said it wasn't more process, it was more talent, and then the field, sorry about the phone, the field resisted the training because they wanted to be out selling, right? That was always the thing, field versus headquarters. Headquarters would come out with a thing, even at GE, and say, here's our new stuff. You're going to push this, you're going to do this program. And very often the field would resist it if in their gut, those A player salespeople were like, that's not really going to help me sell. And I think you have to rely on the judgment of leadership, even if you have the best tools and database and process.
Correct.
All right, Joel, that was excellent stuff on sales. I've got some other topics we wanted to touch on before we run out of time, Joel, but did you have anything last on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just shifting more to like a very general question, because, we talked a lot, and obviously there's way more to Larry than just the sales aspect, right? So Larry, you've run and built very large, successful organizations. In fact, you just traded out of one of them and did great. I guess, just very broadly speaking, what are the things that you picked up from GE that are just the indelible things? Like maybe the top 3 things that you say, just stick with you and you're not going to shake them out of Larry. Larry's always going to use pipeline reporting, for example. Like, can you think of like the top 3 things that you picked up from your experience at GE?
Relationship management is critical. And so today I won't hire anybody that doesn't have existing relationships. And I think over the years, the folks that I have hired that didn't have relationships were not very successful. So I think today having existing relationships goes a long way. Look, you and I know each other for 20 years, and we really never did business. And we were friendly folks in the industry, and I think that goes a long way today, right? I mean, this relationship piece to me is something that I preach. It's not about a transaction; it's about a relationship, and our sales group gets tired of hearing it from me, but I think today this is absolutely critical.
Boy, Larry, you are making me beam, because I've talked to Joel about my own little business strategy for my crappy little consulting company, a little boutique firm. I'm very small on purpose, but I keep talking about that circle of trust. I've got people, a lot of my clients, a lot of the consultants that have worked with me are people I've known for 20 or more years, some of which I never did do business with,
Yeah.
right? Raj Rao was Joel and my former boss. He was the CIO at Geis. He went into Burger King. He's hired other people that have been my consultants. I tried to sell him consulting. It never worked out. He didn't bring me on for a gig, but he's still one of my most trusted advisors. In fact, he's on my team now. And then there are the ones you do business with as well. But yeah, that long-term relationship, boy, that you're singing my song. I love hearing that, because people seem to want to like build 5,000 LinkedIn connections and network like crazy and have what I consider more shallow relationships, because they just want to sell versus the long stuff. Yeah, Joel.
What ties into that as well is I'm a big believer in personal brand. And so at GE, right, we were proud to carry the meatball on our card, and they built that brand image that you should be, you should be proud to carry that. I'm a big believer in personal brand today. And so everything that you do out there in the world of digital today is tracked, it's out there. And I think that it's critical that people know who you are, what you do, and do things for the industry or socially that you don't benefit for personally. But in the long run, you really do, because it always comes back to help. And I'm a big believer in all of that personal brand. Now, I have a son, he's 25. James is in the professional world for over 3 years. And when James was in high school, I was the chairman of the business partnership program at the two high schools we have in town. And every year, the first year we did it was the second year of Shark Tank. And we created our own Shark Tank for the high schoolers. We would have 40 teams compete. In the first year, we were able to get Damon John to Skype in and talk to the kids. And I did not know the topic that he was going to talk to them, but he spent 15 minutes talking to high school kids about their personal brand and why he didn't hire somebody recently who they really liked, because as they dug into her personal history, she bashed her boss on Facebook.
Wow, that's so
So
valuable for young kids to hear, right?
the
Yeah.
kids have to hear this today. And so I'm a big believer in personal brand. And if you're going to get involved in LinkedIn, don't put anything that's stupid up there, and don't connect with everybody that you can. I'm getting 15, 20 requests a day from people all over the world that I aren't even in, a related business that I'm in, or that I would ever, do business. And to me, that's my brand, and I don't want to have them to have access to my brand that way.
Boy,
So I think
I
it's
love it.
a big thing today when it comes to digital.
Joel, I consider Joel my coach on my personal brand, because I get a little cynical about all the, building the, I'm not a sales guy. You know what I mean? I value my relationship and my integrity. Don't get me wrong. Everything you said, I agree with, but I'm not as good at thinking about it in terms of how I then connect in the relationships on the outside, like sales and whatever. And that's why I've linked up with Joel to do this, because he's way ahead of me. He's a thought leader in his industry. He's doing panel discussions, but he always does it with integrity. And the people he brings onto his other podcast, or the people he interviews for articles and whatnot, are sharp and spot on. And so that I think you guys are really good at it. So I envy it and aspire to it. But I think it's
Yeah.
great advice.
So my days after GE, when GE got out of the auto finance business, I spent 5 years at Household Auto, which became HSBC Auto. And I ran the non-dealer program for banks and credit unions and early stage internet companies back in the day. When HSBC came in, I left about a year later and joined our former CEO in the mortgage business, the wholesale mortgage business, and stayed about 5 years until the first credit crisis hit and all of the securitization shut down and most of those business shuttered. And so I took at that time a buyout and said, okay, what do I want to do next? And I decided to, a friend of mine called me and said, hey, I'm running a loan servicing business. We need somebody like yourself to come in as a consultant and then, possibly join us. Would you like to do that? I did. And I figured out two things. I like the loan servicing business, and I know it based upon my, X amount of years in financial services. But number two, I didn't like the company. I thought they were quite antiquated. So I went out and bought my own. And so in 2010, early 2010, I bought a company with two partners called First Associates. At that time was a mobile home servicing company. We grew that business from 6 people to over 600 people. And in the summer of 2019, we sold the majority of our stock to Stone Point Capital, which is a private equity firm. And then I took the rollover equity, and when COVID hit, decided that I have now had enough of commuting back and forth to San Diego twice a month. And I'd either like to hang out and do nothing or find something else to do eventually. And so I left in September of 2020, joined a couple boards. My relationships with the conferences, they became virtual, was still there. They all asked me to moderate panels, which I still do today. And in January, I took a position with a Australian fintech company by the name of Remitter. Remitter is a digital accounts receivable and collection platform. And we're growing that business after a proof of concept in the US. We're now launching that to lenders throughout North America.
So I want to bring you back because I cut you off because I got all excited about personal brand. Joel asked for the three things. I don't know if you had three, but relationship management was one. Was personal brand the second one, or was that a tangent?
Absolutely. Personal
Okay.
brand is absolutely the second thing.
Okay. And is there a third? We don't want to force you to do three. If there's five, we can do
I
five
think
then.
there would be many things that went into number three. You know, a lot
Okay.
of the training, a lot of the management tools, the relationship piece of the coworkers, things like that.
Okay. Well, then can we shift to you? Okay. So you've obviously know about business development, you know about launching companies, leading companies, buying companies. What did you learn anything when you did that within GE? They asked you to head up a group, right? Which is, when they took top talent, so was there anything about the leadership process, about the way GE did either acquisitions or launched new initiatives and new markets, that you would want to share that worked, because that's very different than just, hey, here, we got a business, go sell, right?
Yeah, I really wasn't in that too much. My last year and a half at GE, when I moved over to GE Fleet, was a brand new concept through Fleet, which was the light and medium duty truck finance business. And so that was new. So they looked at it different. And I did learn a lot based upon how do you set up your marketing campaigns, and how do you aggressively go after this business, and round out your staff and such. And that helped me later on in my career.
Got it. Yeah. What we're going to probably cover is, capital was a M&A machine, acquire. And what was really interesting for me to watch, because we both worked at GE Capital Fleet Services, but not at the same time, but didn't know each other because I was over in Europe. My business card, and it was a bummer, actually said Avis Fleet Services, because then it finally said a GE Capital company, because in Europe they acquired the fleet management business of Avis, which was number
Correct.
2, to Lease Plan, which was number 1. These are all company cars. But I was watching, I lived it, and then I saw over and over acquisition after acquisition. And what was fascinating, and again, Joel, we'll try to find some guests who are really good. I'd love to find one of those integration managers, right? Because that was a process where they would take the GE culture and they would respect what was in the companies that they bought, of course, because that they bought it for a reason. But that company would be a GE company through and through so fast. It was unbelievable.
Well,
And
it's interesting you say this here, because I mentioned George Klinke early on, who's my mentor. And when I was taking the role at Remitter, before I did, I called George, because George was on the M&A team for auto finance. And I said, George, here's what I'm thinking of doing. I said, I'm relying on you to do an analysis for me. And he came back with a very detailed analysis based upon his days on the M&A side at GE.
Yep, that was world class, and it was a machine. And again, that same top talent rigor that you talked about selling, they put those kinds of people on the BD teams, and it was more the integration that I was impressed with than the acquisition side. Don't get me wrong; they did due diligence, they had corporate audit staff. GE knew how to crunch numbers as good as anyone. And you mentioned Dennis Naden, Dennis Namer, and these big names at GE Capital. They knew how to grow. But then it was the hard work, in my opinion. Maybe it's because I was one of the guys that came in to kind of clean up some of the messes after you put all this stuff together and go, oh my gosh, you've licked off some rocks and found some worms and problems. It's like, we got to get these systems integrated. We got to get part of GE. So I suffered through it, but I was very impressed with how those integrations went. And so, yeah, those checklists I use to this day, whether it's due diligence or integration.
Correct. I mean, think about it. I think many of us who, were fans of Jack were disappointed when Jack retired, and the predecessors came in. And so, I still, bleed the GE meatball. In fact, my son was a student at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut at the Jack Welch School of Business. And he had a special Jack Welch scholarship program he was in, and Jack would come up and work with the kids.
Wow. That's great. That's great. And other executives I've talked to value the GE way of training so much. I just talked to a former CEO, one of my former bosses, and I'm going to hope to bring him on the show here. But he said the same thing. It was his son or son-in-law. He's like, I was really trying to push for him to get something like FMP, MMP, whatever, and he did it at another company,
Right.
and it looked good on paper, and then he went in and it wasn't very good. It wasn't the same, the rigor. So
That's right.
I bleed the meatball as well, from that era. So that's great.
So we're probably about at time. If Tom, if you're okay, I want to ask, I want to give Larry the last word here.
Go for it.
So Larry, there's a lot of mystique around Jack Welch. I mean, he was a great manager. He was a great leader. I mean, he had a nose for a lot of things. I mean, HR is just one of them, right? I mean, he gave HR a seat at the table. I don't know that CEOs had done that in the past, and he put a lot of stock in building the team. But so now you've got folks like, Bezos and Elon Musk, very different leaders. Head of Berkshire Hathaway stepping down. Do you think we're going to have a leader that's like Jack again? I know it's a weird question, and I hate to make it sound all cheesy, but I mean, I think there's what I'm really trying to get at. I think there's a relevance to what he did and what he built, and I think it has a lasting effect. And that to me is a sign of greatness. Do you see anybody else out there that has that kind of impact that is active today?
So I'm going to answer this in a second, but probably one of the things that I've taken away from Jack is that I still use little note cards and send note cards out to people and clients and such, handwritten, which Jack did. But I can tell you that none of those leaders that you mentioned, who are all very good, I'm certain they don't do that. This was a trait of Jack's and something that I've prided myself on doing. In fact, I have 2 new employees, and I have the cards out on my desk to send to today. So it's pretty interesting. But I think the issue with today in 2021 is that the business community and the world today, they can't take the bluntness that Jack would bring. Jack was brutally honest. He was blunt. He was take no prisoners. If something was wrong, he'd call it out. And I think that today, many of the folks just sugarcoat things. And I don't think that the reception to Jack's bluntness would be well received.
Well, I'd agree with that, because the former CEO I was talking about said to me in my career, when I was working for him, I was the CIO of the business. He was the CEO. And he said, you know what, Tom, Jack Welch deals with the truth better than almost anyone ever, especially at that level. He said, sometimes getting the truth to Jack is a challenge. And, we're not going to go down this whole path, but Joel and I talked about, well, what went wrong, blah, blah, blah. And one of the articles I read about why the company kind of went down afterwards, and, we're not going to try to shoot arrows at all the future leaders and stuff. But one article in the Wall Street Journal was all about how it kind of became a theater, of yes, and a theater of versus, smoke and mirrors theater at that executive level versus candid, real truth. Right. And boy, that's deadly to a big company.
So I'll leave you with this quick story. So as part of the Boundaryless Sales Group, I was selected one of 12 people to present to Jack at an all sales day that we were going to have at the NBC studios where Saturday Night Live is filmed. And so you're allowed to bring clients, but later on. And so there's room at Saturday Night Live studios. The studio was filled with about 700 GE associates. And you had to send in your presentation on your business probably 5 or 6 days before. And this was the 4 block that we were talking about earlier, right? The 4 block is a 1-page presentation broken out into 4. I use it today. There's no more large decks. You were not allowed to have that at GE. And the first guy that was up was NBC, a gentleman from NBC who was really hosting the event. And when the Q&A time came, Jack knew all of the ratings and he knew all of the information. I'm sure his staff helped him prep for that and gave him some of these things. Then next up was GE Medical, and Jack had run GE Medical at one point. And so he got into a very interesting conversation about medical technology and what was coming. And then the third guy that was up was GE Supply. And this guy got up there with his 4 block and he shared that his revenues were going to be off 22% this year. And so at GE, if we all had to project 20% growth and you needed
Right.
to achieve it, or that business wasn't going to be there too long. And so, Jack beat up this guy something fierce in front of 700 people. And,
Ouch.
and now it's my turn. And I'm like,
Oh,
oh boy,
man.
here we go.
This is like where comedians are like, what did you do? You let me in and you were too good or you were
Oh my gosh.
crappy.
Right.
Oh,
And
It's
so
like
they
something out of a movie, right? Where like the
Oh.
king is up there and someone does
Cooler.
something stupid and he chops his head off and it's like, and now it's up to Larry, right?
Now it's
So
your
they,
turn to
they
go.
have the 12 of us sitting in the front, on like a panel, and then I have to get up in front of Jack. And so I'm presenting this new program at GE Fleet and how we're going to roll it out and the revenue stream and so forth. 2 months earlier, GE Auto had a loss of about $20 million on lease residuals, and the lease residuals were going lower. And it ultimately led to them closing the business. And so Jack was drilling me on the difference between this and the GE Auto business back in the day. And we had a zero residual, so there was no residual risk, but I had to go through that. And so after my presentation and Jack's Q&A, there was a break, and Jack came up to me and shook my hand and appreciated all the information, thought I did a great job. And it's through today,
I know.
the highlights of my career.
That's awesome.
My hands are like filled with this like sweat. I just hearing the story.
And then years later, when Jack was rolling out his last book at Sacred Heart University, they took the Jack Welch students, the 12 kids that were part of this program, and they escorted Jack in, and they were assisting Jack. And so my son had a conversation with Jack and told him that many years ago that I was at GE Auto and I did a presentation, and I'm sure Jack doesn't remember me. I mean, at this point, but he made it with my son that he really knew me back in the day and so forth, and to please say hello to your dad. And I thought that's all I need to know as a leader. That's what he did, and he made him feel comfortable.
That's class.
That's great.
And
No,
so I leave you with that today.
no, Larry, thank you. What I'll say, and I'll let Joel wrap it up at the very end here, but look, we share these anecdotes and a little bit of war stories when you get people who work together. But what I find about when I do, this is why we're doing this podcast, is I like doing this with the folks in those days, because there's a real business. There's always takeaways from the anecdotes, lessons about leadership, about how to manage, about, principles that applied. So, but also just in general, the content you've shared with us, my gosh, this could be a great little mini training course for anyone who's interested in sales and relationship building and stuff. So I really appreciate your time. We really are thankful for it. And you shared with us a lot. And I think the complimentary little blog post with some of the artifacts will be valuable for people as well. So from my perspective, thank you so much, Larry.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Larry Chiavaro, he's the CEO of Remitter and former GE alum. Thank you so much for filling us in on a lot of the aspects, Tom, that we were talking about, sales and sales engineering and sales management and how GE manifests that. Larry, thank you so much.
My pleasure, guys. It's always nice to see you. Bye-bye now.
All right. Take care.